Today, chat, I am going to be explaining the Disney Parks Iceberg. Now, if you're not familiar with the Iceberg template, I'll explain it to you. The Iceberg format is made for all kinds of different fandoms. Just like you all know, an iceberg gets deeper and deeper and deeper. The idea of these kinds of charts is that the most kind of common knowledge, secrets, or legends, or myths are at the surface level, and as you get deeper, they get more niche, maybe a little bit darker. And so we have a Disney Parks one to go through today. So I'm going to go through all of these. I'm going to explain why they're on here, what they mean, what they are referencing to. It'll give me an opportunity both to tell you all some stories, to share some myths, to talk about some things that I probably have never talked about before. We're getting started at the very top level with Disneyland Cats. During the creation of Disneyland, there were a lot of feral cats that were making their home in the construction area of Disneyland. They often were living in the castle. Over time, they were not kicked out. They were not removed. The decision was made basically, hey, let them live as essentially natural pest control. They would keep out rodents, they would keep out critters. And so if you're a Disneyland or Disney California adventure today, you very well might find cats roaming around because they are Cats members. Main Street windows. This is a big one everyone I think is familiar with. And that is, of course, that the windows on Main Street in Disneyland, in the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, and in every Disneyland-esque park that is around the world, the names on the windows will often reference important people within the history of Disney, whether that be Walt and Roy, whether that be Imagineers. It can be tough to try and pick out, who's who, and often the companies that they are named for, the business that they have is a reference to what they did at the Disney parks, and so you can kind of read into what they do. Next up is the Utilador. Just in the event that none of you all had ever seen the Utilador, I will solve that problem for you. Because the story goes that when Disneyland was operating and we were planning the creation of Walt Disney World, legend has it Walt saw a person from Tomorrowland dressed in a spacesuit outfit walk through Frontierland. He didn't like that the theming was broken in that moment, and so when they went to build Walt Disney World, he said he was going to solve that problem. Walt Disney World obviously has a problem, which is that it's a swamp. It's built in Florida in a swamp, and whereas here you can dig down, in Florida you cannot. And so they actually built Walt Disney World up. All of the ground that they took out of Seven Seas Lagoon, out of Bay Lake, was then built so that the Magic Kingdom itself sits on the second floor, and the ground level is actually the Utiladors. It's an underground system of hallways that cast members can use to move across Magic Kingdom without ever going into guest view. I'm gonna be honest, they're not particularly exciting. Hey, look, the Utiladors. That's what they look like. Now, this is an old video, but they still look like this, or at least they did when I left. It's a big concrete tunnel, and there's a subway there. You can eat sandwiches, and it smells pretty bad. The walls are color-coded, so you would have different areas the walls were colored based on what land you were in. When I was a cast member, there was a time clock that was right here. And you would walk in from the bus, and this is where you would clock in. This is a place called Cash Control. And then if you were to turn down this hallway on the right here, this goes down and under the castle. All right, next up we have Cinderella Castle Suite. Cinderella Castle Suite is essentially a hotel room. It's a room that is in the castle itself. During the Year of a Million Dreams, which actually was the 2 years of 2 million dreams, which took place in 2007 to 2008, every day a family would be given away a stay in the Cinderella Castle Suite, and it would be determined randomly. So there was a computer system that would basically throw out some randomized way of picking guests. For instance, maybe it is the 11th family to go through the 13th turnstile at Epcot after 8 a.m. So every day, the Dream Squad, which was a group of cast members specifically there for the 2 years of 2 million dreams, would get this thing, and then they would go and they would give away the castle suite. Here are some photos of Cinderella Castle Suite. Look at it in all its glory. This is the sitting room of Cinderella's Castle Suite. Here is the tub of Cinderella's Castle Suite. Here's the beds of Cinderella's Castle Suite with this lovely headboard feature that has the crest of Cinderella. The rest of the room, this painting of Cinderella up here turns into a television. A couple things you might not have noticed here. All of the windows in the suite are stained glass. You can't actually see out of most of them. There is one glass slipper window that is you are able to see through, but it's at aimed at a very specific area. It's quite small. Is the suite still in use now or no? Great question. Not really. Sometimes they utilize it for celebrities, but they haven't ever since 2008 been able to figure out how to utilize it. Next up, Andy's Coming. This was a viral sensation. Around the year 2013, this photo went viral. Woody and Jesse were doing meet and greets at the exit of Splash Mountain. I know that because I worked here on a few occasions. And around 2013, this photo went viral with a guest laying down, and it said, like, if you say Andy's coming, the toy characters will drop to the ground because they are scared of Andy's coming. Now, this was one picture taken on one instance with characters doing things characters weren't supposed to do. This picture never should have been taken. Unfortunately, it did get taken. It got posted to Pinterest in 2013. It became incredibly viral to the point where, as somebody that was working in entertainment at the time, I'll tell you, it got shouted literally all the time. Don't do this, please. And then when Toy Story 3 came out, people just started saying, Andy's at college. It just started being sassy back. Force perspective, this one is very well known. This is the idea that, of course, there's architecture that's created at Disney that is made to look bigger or smaller based on where you're standing. The classic one that gets memed a lot is Beast Castle in Magic Kingdom, which, boy, did they really try to make it look like it was far away and big, and instead it just looks small. Got the idea on a bench. This is the classic Disneyland origin story of Walt Disney being at Griffith Park in LA and watching his daughters on the merry-go-round and thinking there should be a place where parents and kids can enjoy rides like this that can have fun together. If you go to Disneyland, you can see that bench. It's in the entrance to Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, as well as one of the carousel horses. And if you go to Griffith Park, you can see the carousel. And then let's go to the opposite end. If that was the origin story of Disneyland, Walt's apartment light is, of course, a dedication to Walt. Above the fire hall in Disneyland is Walt's apartment. When Disneyland was being constructed, Walt was both supporting the studio as well as the construction of Disneyland, the animation studio as well as the construction of Disneyland, and he was spending really long days there. So there was an apartment that was built in the top level of the fire hall. It is still there to this day. When he used to be visiting, the light would be on just to let people know he was around. And then after his death, the lamp was turned on in the window as a dedication, as a reminder of Walt. That is the end of the top one. And that brings us down to the second layer of the iceberg. The second one is going to kick off with Emu Legs. So this reference is a story, a legend, that turkey legs at the Disney parks are not actually made of turkey. They are made of emu legs. They're just too big. How could they be so big? They can't possibly be turkeys. Now, where did this rumor start? Zachary Levi, Flynn Rider?
The ambiance is beautiful. You just walk, it's like a beautiful park that also happens to have rides. We'll get a turkey leg, which, by the way, I don't know if you know this, the turkey legs at Disneyland, I've come to find out, are not actually turkey.
What are you talking about? Wait,
emu.
the big turkey legs that
They're
people eat?
emu legs. No, I swear, I have friends that have worked for Disneyland, and they said, well, they're actually emu. There's a big old emu legs.
So, listen, perhaps he was told this by somebody that worked at Disneyland just to screw with him. Maybe they thought it was an obvious joke and he took it as factual information, and it caught some amount of traction. So this was a pretty popular rumor. So thanks, Flynn Rider. Next up is Chewy Mode. Chewy Mode is, I put this pretty high. I think that it's meant to be a secret that would be lower. Chewy Mode is a secret mode in Smuggler's Run, where if you hit the correct combination of buttons at the correct time, then the voiceover of Hondo gets replaced by Chewie. It was meant to be a little secret from the Imagineers for those big Star Wars fans that could find the thing. Again, I think that it, maybe a couple years ago would have been down a little bit more, but these days I've seen a lot of short form that have brought it up, and so I think it's more in the collective consciousness these days. Next up is SEA. The SEA is the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. Now, while we may know this now referenced from the Skipper Canteen in Walt Disney World, it actually got its start in Tokyo Disney Sea. There was a walkthrough attraction called Fortress Explorations. This is the first instance of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers getting mentioned in a Disney park, so it got started with Disney Sea. From there, the next really obvious, the kind of the big push of it was Mystic Manor in Hong Kong. That really solidified SEA. That started like giving it a name and putting people's faces on it and really kind of pushing it. And since then, we've gotten more. Skipper Canteen is another example, and on and on and on. So, but basically, it's a sort of secret society, if you will, of well-to-do adventurers and explorers, and they're being kind of trickled into different Disney attractions around the world. Tom Sawyer paintbrushes. Several years ago, it was well known that if you were early to Tom Sawyer Island, that the cast members on Tom Sawyer Island would hide a few paintbrushes, much like, whitewashing the fence, right? Paintbrushes with a little bit of white paint on the top. They would hide like 6-ish, 7, 8 paintbrushes in plain sight for the very first guests on Tom Sawyer Island to find. And if you found one, you could take it to a cast member and they would give you a fast pass for your whole group for an attraction that day. It went away and nobody found any paintbrushes. They had some paintbrushes that were like part of set decoration, but they were drilled in, couldn't move, that kind of thing. And then I think in 2020, it came back for a very short amount of time. Now, because of new fast pass system, they no longer would give you a fast pass. You would get like a certificate that you found the paintbrushes, but it only ran for about 3 months and then it ended again. Walt's frozen head. Again, I think a pretty popular, ridiculous rumor is that when Walt Disney died, his head was cryogenically frozen. People would tell you that it's either under Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland or in the Utilador in the Magic Kingdom. Both of those are popular rumors, and by that I mean it's definitely there. You should go see it. That's a part of the Utilador that I can't show you, but as a cast member, I did get a chance to walk by. It is right next to the emu pen. That's true. Snow White dies. Sure. Okay. Listen, I don't know exactly what this one's about because every iceberg that I found had this listed, and I don't know exactly what it's referencing. My idea is based on the movie, and my research supports this. I don't really know what it has to do with the ride, except that there is a ride that tells the story of Snow White, and therefore I guess it's happening too. Either way, the theory is that at the end of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Snow White is dead. After she eats the poison apple, she is not actually like awoken by the prince. She is dead, and that the prince takes her to heaven. And here is your only evidence for such a thing. You don't actually see like a kingdom. It is simply golden clouds and the sky and the castle that are in the golden clouds. The prince is guiding Snow White to heaven because she is dead. Half light bulb. The half light bulb is on Main Street, USA in Disneyland. The story goes that there are a set of light bulbs. They're at the corner of Main Street, USA. They are red and white alternating, and that Walt Disney looked at the red and white alternating light bulbs and saw that there were 2 white light bulbs next to one another. It's not an even number of light bulbs. It's an odd number of light bulbs, which meant that there were 2 white light bulbs that ended up next to one another. The pattern could not actually complete. Being a stickler for detail and not wanting the pattern to be messed up like this, they solved this by putting in a half light bulb. So as you can see, where the 2 white light bulbs were, they just painted one half of it red and one half of it white. This is still there. You can go and see it in Disneyland today. 30 steps from a garbage can. Again, pretty well known if you are a Walt fan, but there are obviously a lot of garbage cans that go throughout Disneyland, Walt Disney World, and other Disney theme parks around the world. This started from, obviously, Walt wanting to have a very clean theme park. To do this, Walt would watch people who had food, who had trash, and he would count how many steps it would take for them to get tired of carrying their thing around and just drop it on the ground. And finally, we have, I love that idea. This, of course, is a reference to Rock and Roller Coaster, where the pre-show of Rock and Roller Coaster, of course, featuring Aerosmith, seeing Aerosmith at the studio, them having to run away to make it to their show on time, them not wanting to leave their fans behind. They need to bring you with them. When they say, what if they just come along? Steven Tyler says, wait a minute. I love that idea. Wait a minute. I love that idea. Of course, he throws up a questionable hand sign on his head, but because of it being perhaps not totally appropriate, it has since been fixed. Now has him go, wait a minute. I love that idea. We are on to number 3. Finally, we are beneath the surface of the iceberg. First up, let's start with Tower of Terror legs. This is a Disneyland exclusive, y'all. This refers to a weird, purposeful Easter egg that is under the stairs. On the way out of Tower of Terror, if you were to look under the stairs, it is totally dark. You would have to use a flash, but there were a pair of legs that were positioned there as if a dead body by the Imagineers. Again, this went the way once the Tower of Terror was rethemed to Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. Next is Pirates Real Bones. It is said that in the early days of Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland, that the bones that were created did not look close enough to real bones. And so bones were obtained from local universities to then use on the attraction. Since then, they've been replaced. Legend has it that one skull remains on Pirates of the Caribbean, the skull that is on the headboard in the caves. And I will acknowledge that it does look different than every other skull that's on the ride. The coloration is different. It has more flaws. It does look different than every other skull that's on the attraction. Next is the Slain Knights. This is a fun one. Not too long ago, I referenced the old Discovery River boat cruise. And on the Discovery River boats, of course, in the early days of Disney's Animal Kingdom, there were plans for the Beastly Kingdom, which was going to be a land within Animal Kingdom that celebrated animals from fantasy. That there was going to be a unicorn attraction, a dragon attraction. There's all kinds of stories about this. And it was originally planned for phase 2 of Disney's Animal Kingdom. The space was used for Camp Minnie Mickey, and that there was still plans to put it in phase 2. Because they were still planning for it, they put some teasers into the Animal Kingdom to sort of like plant seeds, right? This is why on the Animal Kingdom sign, you may see a dragon, even though there's no dragons in Animal Kingdom. You also, at the entrance of Animal Kingdom over the ticket booths, one of the heads is a dragon head. And when the park opened, if you went on the Discovery Riverboats, you would see this. This rock work, which by the way is still there, you would see this happen. As you went by, a dragon would breathe fire from the mouth of this cave. It was the only reference that we would have to this beastly kingdom. There was supposed to be a full dragon animatronic, but they instead used that money on making a dinosaur animatronic that would go on the same attraction. That was not the original version of this little motif, because chat, the original version of this actually had one additional feature. Outside the Cave of the Dragon, originally were meant to be these knights scattered all around the cave mouth of the dragon. The feedback was so negative about how gruesome this was or how violent it was that before the park ever actually opened to guests, they were removed. So they were there originally. That was the plan. They were outside of that cave, but that is the Slain Knights from the Discovery Riverboats in Disney's Animal Kingdom. George. Okay, we're on to George. George is a ghost at Pirates of the Caribbean that the cast members are well aware of, who it is said that if you do not say good morning to George and good night to George, you will have problems with the attraction throughout the day. That chaos will happen, you will have ride closures, that things will go poorly. And so every morning, the cast members of Pirates of the Caribbean will say, good morning, George. And every night, they will say, good night, George, because otherwise he will cause issues for you during your attraction. There's actually another one of these at Tower of Terror. Molly reminded me that there is supposedly the ventriloquist doll in Tower of Terror at Walt Disney World is haunted by someone named Caesar, and that similarly, the Tower cast will say good morning to Caesar and good night to Caesar. So these types of little traditions that happen around attractions, I think they're fun. I think it's a fun thing to sort of like teach the cast members a tradition about. Next up is the Atlantis Expedition. This is a fun, very short-lived one. So the Atlantis Expedition, you are likely familiar with the submarine voyage. Of course, there have been a couple different versions of the submarine voyage. There was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in Walt Disney World. There's currently the Finding Nemo submarine voyage. And over the decades, there have been many versions of the submarine voyage to Disneyland. But for a long time, it was not running. In the early 2000s, Disney had thought that it had found its IP to re-up the submarine voyage, to reinvest in it, to find a new version of the submarine voyage. And that was in their animated feature, Atlantis, Lost Empire. In fact, they were quite invested in the idea. They thought for sure that Atlantis was going to be the source of their next submarine voyage. They were so invested in it that they put this lovely tarp on their submarine voyage exterior. You could walk by in Disneyland, and for some amount of time, this was on display. Atlantis Expedition Imagineering Preparation Bay. They were quite invested in the idea, enough so to basically display it and promote it to anyone that was in Disneyland. Unfortunately for them, Atlantis did not do very well. It flopped. Not too long after, they thought they were going to be re-upped again when Treasure Planet came out. They thought, I can do a Treasure Planet version of that ride, and then that movie also flopped. They did eventually get bailed out by Finding Nemo, though. World Showplace is Millennium Village. In Epcot, there is a large building, often used as a festival center, that is between Canada and the United Kingdom. It originally opened as the Millennium Village for the Millennium Celebration at Epcot. Inside, it featured a bunch of different stands and displays for a bunch of different countries that are not currently represented at Epcot. Since then, it is a massive space that is still between Canada and the United Kingdom. It is used for often as a festival center for booths that are in there, maybe for food and wine or farts or flower and garden. Sometimes they would do like cooking demonstrations. I'm gonna tell you the weirdest thing I went there for was when I did my college program, I had a formal that was in that building and everybody went and partied in that building. If you ever walk by and you see a big gate that is closed, it says WS at the top. That doesn't stand for World Showcase. It stands for World Showplace. River Country. River Country was a water park. Here is a promo for River Country from the 1980s.
A lot of the fun of Fort Wilderness is found right here in River Country.
A lot of the fun. A lot of the fun.
It's a newfangled version of the old swimming hole. And Huck Finn never had it so good.
Imagine the old swimming hole updated with a few new twists and turns. That's River Country in the Fort Wilderness Resort. River Country is a newfangled version of the old swimming hole.
How many times are you going to say swimming hole? You've said swimming hole twice.
Where you can ride, slide, and splash into the water 40 different ways. All of the fun of River Country is right here on the shores of Bay Lake, just minutes from wherever in the world you're staying.
River Country was a water park that was built on the shores of Bay Lake shortly after Walt Disney World opened. It was the first water park at the theme park, and it was, you know, the newfangled swimming hole. It was quite popular. A lot of people went there. It featured a few different slides, and there are a lot of people that would argue a lot of different reasons why River Country closed, such as, of course, 9/11 affecting tourism, that it had been around for about 35 years and that it was falling into disrepair. There are some stories of people getting injured at River Country. There are some stories about an amoeba at River Country. There are lots of different stories about River Country, all right? I'm actually not here to talk about why it closed. We all know it closed. There are many different factors. I would imagine it's all of them, not just one of them. The interesting thing about River Country is that they didn't tear it down for a long time. It just sat there. The actual creepy thing about River Country was that as part of working at Magic Kingdom Entertainment, I would support the backyard barbecue at Fort Wilderness on occasion. Backyard barbecue was a character dining experience where Mickey and Minnie and Chip and Dale and Goofy would go and be there for a barbecue. Backyard barbecue, the offset location, the backstage location, backed up right to the property of River Country. And let me tell you the creepiest thing that maybe I ever experienced at Disney World, which was that when you would walk that backstage area and be right next to River Country, all of the music was still on. The lights were still on. The music was still on. It was as if the park was still operating. My understanding of this was that River Country was just on the same grid as this part of Fort Wilderness. And so basically, like, once they turned on Fort Wilderness, it also turned on River Country. But it wasn't great, I'll tell you that. Welcome to River Country, the newfangled swimming hole where you could play with your pals in River Country and go down the slides and have a great time. Huck Finn never had it so good. Now, since then, River Country has been knocked down because there were plans prior to the panorama. There were plans for a resort. They actually started some of that construction work. It's unclear what's going to happen over there, but they did eventually tear down River Country. Discovery Island. Speaking of things on Bay Lake, there's Discovery Island. Boy, that story is basically exactly the same, only a little bit different. Discovery Island is an island that's in the middle of Bay Lake. In one time was meant to be a animal conservatory. It was sort of like, think about if Animal Kingdom was on an island in the middle of Bay Lake. You could go there, you could see different exotic birds, you could see all this different plant life. It was only accessible by boat, and it eventually closed. It also still stands to this day. This is still in Bay Lake. You can still see this from the water. If you were to take a boat on Bay Lake, you can still see the docks. It's very, very visible. They closed down Discovery Island because, again, of low tourism. Basically, they closed down Discovery Island as they were planning to open Animal Kingdom. Exotic animals and whatnot were removed, but all the buildings are still there. All of the infrastructure is still there. These next two, I think, are pretty quick, though. Disney Secret Service. I think that this is just referencing that there are plainclothes officers, basically. There's plainclothes security that are in Disney. I think that that's pretty common knowledge, that there are plainclothes security cast members that are all throughout the parks that look as though they are any other guest. And finally, we have death certificate. Another very common rumor among guests is that if you were to go on the Haunted Mansion and you were to request at the end of your visit, if you went to a cast member, you might say, "Can I get my death certificate?" They would then produce that for you. They would create a death certificate and print it out and provide it to you. And that's not true. It's not a real thing that happens. Let's move on to the next layer. And we're starting off with a weird one, and that is Escape from Tomorrow. Escape from Tomorrow is a movie that was shot without Disney's permission, basically through guerrilla filming tactics. People just went to Disney and filmed a bunch of footage and made a movie from it. I've watched it in full. It's trash. And that's not me saying that as oh, I'm a Disney fan. And I'm saying that as just somebody that likes movies. And this is a bad one. They just filmed around the theme park, different scenes of people in Disney. And then they took this footage and they made a film from it. And to be honest with you, I think that they expected this to do well because they expected to get sued. Back when I looked into this and watched it, I found their website where they had a day counter of how many days since Mickey didn't sue us. And they took it to Sundance, and I think they expected that at some point Disney would take them to court and that publicity would be good enough. And Disney did exactly what they should have done, which was that they totally ignored it. They said nothing. They gave it no attention at all. They didn't take them to court. They didn't sue them. And I think because of that, a lot of people don't know that it exists. Big Red. Ah, yes, Big Red. We're back to Animal Kingdom for Big Red. If you've ever been in the Kilimanjaro Safari queue and you have seen this poster, come see us. Big Red and her calf, Little Red. This is a reference to exactly what I am about to talk about. So in the old days of Kilimanjaro Safari, there was a storyline that referenced poachers. And not only would you hear about poachers, there would actually be poachers and you would chase them off and have to rescue an elephant. Now, by the time you rode that attraction, likely, by the time I rode that attraction, this would conclude with you saving the baby elephant. That there would be a truck at the end of the attraction with a little animatronic baby elephant that would shake its little head and they would say, "The mama's fine," and you would see the little one and you had saved the elephant from the poachers. The day was saved. However, prior to the attraction opening, during cast member previews, that was not what happened on the attraction. You did save the baby elephant, but unfortunately the poachers killed the mama elephant. You could not save both of them. You only saved the baby. And if you're asking yourself, how did we know that they killed the mama elephant? Yeah, the answer is you would drive by its dead body and then you would go by Little Red and it would be well, at least we saved the baby. And just like the slain knights, the feedback was so overwhelmingly negative. For the love of God, you cannot have a dead mama elephant in this attraction. That's insane that they removed it before the park actually opened. They were really going a certain place with Animal Kingdom. They're we're going to have dead knights with holes in them. We're going to have dead elephants. They were Animal Kingdom is about the facts, Walt's Final Ride. Now, this is a little debatable. I can only assume that this means the final ride that Walt worked on. The common belief is that the final ride that Walt worked on was Pirates of the Caribbean, as it was the attraction that opened after his death, and that he was definitely hands-on in planning and design. Now, to be honest, there were lots of projects that were in development before Walt died, and so who's to really say if that is the last thing he ever worked on. Prop 65. Now, I have to laugh. I have to be, as somebody that lives in California, I have to tell you that seeing this on these icebergs made me laugh. Because it was on every Disney Parks iceberg I looked at, but apparently people that don't live in California were quite concerned about this. Prop 65 is a proposition that basically requires any building that contains a chemical that is known in any way to potentially cause cancer or reproductive toxicity to display a sign that says, like, there's something in this building that can cause a thing. And so I'm just going to tell you that the reason this is on here, I did some research, is that people were like, what is it in Disneyland that's causing cancer? Why do Disneyland buildings have this sign on it? What's happening in Disneyland? Guys, I gotta be honest with you, it's on every building in California. It's on my apartment building. It's on most restaurants. It's on every building ever in California. Welcome to California. Everything will kill you. Westcott. Westcott is famously known as what was meant to be the second gate in California, what would eventually become Disney California Adventure. It was planned to be the West Coast version of Epcot. Look at this concept art for Westcott. It's crazy. It was going to have a full dome, not unlike Spaceship Earth. It was going to have a bunch of different countries. It was going to be much bigger than Epcot, and it was meant to be the second gate of California. Like many projects, Westcott ultimately did not happen because of, that's right, chat, the failure of Euro Disneyland. Because of the investment of Euro Disney, ultimately this would lead to Westcott not happening, and ultimately it would lead to the creation of Disney California Adventure. We're going to put a pin in that because we're coming back to it. We're on to our first ghost sighting. Mr. One Way. Mr. One Way is a ghost, a fabled ghost at Space Mountain in Disneyland. It is called Mr. One Way because the story goes that this ghost will board Space Mountain with you with single riders. That if you are... I'm sorry for what I'm about to do to some of you. That if you are a single rider on Space Mountain, your adjacent seat will be filled by Mr. One Way, and that he will not get off the attraction. That before the end, Mr. One Way will exit Space Mountain. So he's called Mr. One Way because he never gets off. He only ever rides the ride one way. So I do have footage for you of Mr. One Way allegedly getting on Space Mountain. All right, here's Space Mountain. Here it is in Disneyland. If you've never ridden Space Mountain in Disneyland, yeah, it's 2x2. Isn't that crazy? You're going to be watching from the left. Oh, here he is. Look at him go. Look at him getting that seat. He definitely got in that seat right there. He's sitting in it. Mr. One Way. It's definitely not just a double exposed video of a human person. It's definitely a ghost. So anyway, that's Mr. One Way, the ghost of Space Mountain. Tivoli Gardens. Tivoli Gardens is a Danish amusement park located in Copenhagen that allegedly during the planning of Disneyland, Walt and Lily visited. And he was known to take copious amounts of notes. That he came back from his visit to Tivoli Gardens and said that he had taken notes on everything from the flower arrangements to the food. He was incredibly impressed about the quality of the food in Tivoli Gardens, the way it was designed, and that it is known to be a major inspiration of Disneyland. Barbie World Tour. This was a show at Epcot, the American Gardens Theater, that featured Barbie and Ken and all of their friends, and you could attend. It was just like any other show that was on at the American Gardens Theater at Epcot. Barbie had a pretty strong presence, and you know what? Maybe there's a new movie. Who knows what's going to happen? The return of World of Barbie. Matterhorn Christmas tree. I can only imagine that this is a reference to the star that used to go on the Matterhorn. You could say that this was the first holiday overlay Disney ever had. Disney used to put a star on top of the Matterhorn for Christmas. I guess it kind of looks like a Christmas tree. It doesn't not look like a Christmas tree, but I can only imagine that this is referencing the star put on top of the Matterhorn. And the final one for this category is the Superstar Limo original concept. Superstar Limo is, of course, known as famously the worst attraction ever made at Disney. And part of why that is because of the last minute change to the attraction. During the planning of Disney California Adventure, there was a plan for a fast-paced ride that would take you through Hollywood. The idea was that you were on your way to a red carpet and you were having to speed to get to that red carpet, and you were being chased by paparazzi, or to sign a deal. Yeah, I think it was to sign a deal with Eisner, and you had to run from the paparazzi. During the design and planning, very close to the opening of Disney California Adventure, unfortunately, the tragedy of Princess Diana's death happened. And of course, because of the nature of the way that Princess Diana tragically died, it was really obvious that that ride needed to change. And so in the last minute, the whole ride idea was scrapped, and it was made into what it would eventually become, a dark ride with a bunch of random celebrity cameos through cheap facades and backgrounds. And it would lead it to be commonly thought to be the worst attraction in Disney history. It would last less than a year before it would be closed. But you know what? Because of that, we got the best glow up there's ever been, because I think Monsters, Inc. My Consoler to the Rescue is a very cute dark ride. And so, you know. And so ends that tier of the iceberg. Hidden caves to Disneyland. It was a rumor that was created by a urban explorer, Disney vlogger, who basically faked that he found a cave network that went from Tom Sawyer Island to Disneyland, that you would not need to actually ride the boats, that there was a hidden cave that would run from Disneyland to Tom Sawyer Island. And the way he made this was by going in one end of the cave at Tom Sawyer Island and then going out the other end of the cave at Tom Sawyer Island. And if you know the caves at Tom Sawyer Island, it's really obvious what he did. But a lot of people were tricked. Epcot lost pavilions. The original concept of Epcot, of course, had way more pavilions than what it actually opened with. At one time, there were over 20 pavilions planned for Epcot, which ultimately came down to 9 on opening day. And then later we opened Norway and Morocco, which would bring us up to 11 total at the Walt Disney World Resort. Not only just pavilions, but attractions. For instance, the Mount Fuji roller coaster that was supposed to be in Japan obviously never came to fruition. But there were many, many pavilions, Russia, Israel, Equatorial Africa, Korea, that were all planned and that ultimately would never be created. I highly suggest you check out YouTube videos about it. I believe Defunctland did a 2-part series all about it and crushed it. The original concept of the safari actually was meant to go into Equatorial Africa, and again, would never see the light of day. So, I mean, World Showplace is plenty of land for more pavilions, but instead, I had a prom there. Alien Encounter documentary. This is a fun one. I actually didn't know that this existed. You may be familiar with Alien Encounter Extraterrestrial, which was an attraction that was at the Magic Kingdom. Of course, taken away because it was thought to be too scary. But what I'm sharing with you today is a promotion that they made, that Michael Eisner made, for Alien Encounter Extraterrestrial. Because in planning for that attraction, Disney actually released a whole ass documentary.
Military installation somewhere in the United States.
I love this first line. He says, I'm at a military installation somewhere in the United States. Orlando. He's in Orlando. Or maybe California.
The idea of creatures from another planet might not be as far-fetched as we once thought.
So anyway, this is a 40-minute long documentary that is all about aliens and UFOs and alien encounters, created by Disney, all as a promotion for New Tomorrowland and the Alien Encounter Extraterrestrial attraction. No one can die at Disney. This is one of the stupidest rumors that's on this whole iceberg. There is a widely held belief that no one could die at Disney. And what I mean by that is not that people are not able to die. That's a ridiculous thing to say. The belief is that people will be moved off of property before being declared dead so that Disney can say no one has ever died here. That's obviously a crazy thing. There are some folks that if you listen to them talk about this, they will say, well, the only people that can declare somebody dead are doctors, and that'll happen at a hospital, and so naturally they won't be declared dead until they're at a hospital. Unfortunately, there have been deaths at Walt Disney World, and this is ridiculous. Moving right along, let's talk about Buzzy. Buzzy, our boy Buzzy, comes from the defunct attraction Cranium Command, once held at Epcot. Many people would know that Cranium Command is quite literally the inspiration for Inside Out, but it was a theater attraction where you would be inside the head of a person, and the host was an animatronic little boy named Buzzy. And here he is. Buzzy is right here on this little arm. He's chilling out. He's running things. He's in the Cranium Command. Look at our boy Buzzy. He's got his little aviator jacket on. He's got his little army hat. He is running the world. Look at his cute little face. Again, I'm going to recommend Jenny's video on this because she did all the research and really crushed. But the reference on the iceberg is that much like other abandoned parts of Disney, Cranium Command and Body Wars, both of which were located in the Wonders of Life Pavilion at Epcot, were just left there. They were behind a wall. The Wonders of Life Pavilion was used for festival offerings. It was used for storage. As Jenny talks about in her video, they were actually used at one point. It was allegedly the Body Wars vehicles were actually used to test the new updated Star Tours stuff that was created when Avengers Continue rolled out. They were just left there, totally abandoned, walked away from after the attractions closed. And that included Buzzy. Now, we know this because some urban explorers went and investigated. They went backstage, they went to places they shouldn't have gone, and they found Buzzy hanging out. And there were a few instances of urban explorers going back and finding Buzzy, taking a look at him, and then one day, somebody went to find Buzzy, and he was gone. The Buzzy animatronic was missing. There were many rumors about what might have happened to Buzzy. Did he get taken away to go to the archive? Did he get stolen? Did an urban explorer take him? Who's to say? Let's talk about Mr. Toad. It is well known that, of course, the backlash to Mr. Toad being closed at Walt Disney World was loud. Obviously, the internet was different these days. There wasn't social media in quite the same way. And so people needed to protest in person or make websites using Angel Fire. Here is a lovely recreation of what one of those websites looked like. I think that response like this to an attraction closing is ridiculous. I think that what we saw about Splash Mountain is ridiculous, and that we can both love an attraction and appreciate the nostalgia it brings us, and also think that this is crazy. Particularly, I like this line. The fight's not over until Disney understands that what it has done is wrong. Please help us swat them in the rump with the rolled up newspaper of justice. Bad Disney. Bad Disney. Who wrote this? I think part of the reason why the reception was so negative is that if you look into this, you will find that the Orlando Sentinel basically released news that Mr. Toad's Wild Ride was going to close, and then Disney would never actually confirm it, probably because they were worried about a reception like this. And then eventually, by the time Disney said, yes, it's closing, it was less than a week before it actually closed. I do think that that short notice of the confirmation that it was closing probably led to some of the backlash. And then also, I think that this was compounded because shortly before this, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea had closed for what was called a temporary closure, and then never reopened. So I think people were feeling some type of way, maybe not having an opportunity to have their last ride. Regardless, the backlash was pretty intense, and less than a week before the ride actually closed for good, Disney finally confirmed they were going to be closing it, which led to protests and all kinds of other crazy response. At the bottom of this, they have how to contact Disney, and then they've listed all the ways to communicate, right? They have Walt Disney World Guest Communications, Orlando Sentinel. I love this, though. Under snail mail, Marty Sklar, all right? Keep in mind that Marty is not a corporate weasel. Imagineering is responsible for creating the ride, meaning Toads. Be supportive. You know, we're going to dox him, but be supportive. And finally, I have more ghost footage for you, but this is very commonly distributed security cam footage from the Haunted Mansion queue in Disneyland. Again, here we go, shaky cam. And what we're going to see here in just a moment is this white light. Okay, we're going to watch this guy walk down. Okay, here he comes. He's walking down the path. Look at him go. Look at him walking. Look at this ghost. It's so lovely that somebody that could just theoretically float around is walking the path. And that brings us to the end of that tier of the iceberg. We are getting down to the very bottom, y'all. We got 2 tiers remaining. First up is the Haunted Mansion Night Jump Scare. Again, not something I was originally familiar with. So there was a belief, I believe in the 80s, that the Haunted Mansion scares were becoming too predictable, that no longer were people actually being spooked on the Haunted Mansion, and that Disney needed to do something to fix that. And so they implemented this guy. In the Haunted Mansion attraction, there was a person that was in a knight costume that would jump out at you. Unfortunately, this could not last very long. Commonly, when the knight would jump out at the guests in the Doom Buggy, the knight would get punched. Very regularly, this would happen. Also, they would kind of regularly come upon couples doing adult things in their Doom Buggy. And so for these reasons, the knights went away. Now, it has come back on a couple of occasions, on a couple of anniversaries. It is not in quite the same form. So for instance, there is a report that I believe this came back at the 50th anniversary of the Haunted Mansion, not during normal operating hours, but like at after hours stuff, that the knight was in the endless hallway, but he would just like stand out of reach of the guest and sort of like walk from one side of the other as an added effect and as a reference to the old days. Abandoned Pop Century. Oh, this is a good one. So Chad, if you were aware of the Pop Century Resort at Walt Disney World, you might know that it is a value resort, that although it is called Pop Century, it only represented 50 years. Originally, Pop Century Resort was planned to actually represent the full 100 years of the century. It was meant to celebrate 2000, that the Pop Century that we know today was only half of the resort. The legendary years, as they called it, that were going to represent from the turn of the century through the 40s. And they actually started construction on that. They actually started building it. They started building both halves at the same time. There was actually a bridge that still stands to this day. There's a bridge that now goes to the Skyliner that was called the Generation Gap Bridge, and it was meant to connect the legendary years to the classic years. However, due to the tourism bubble burst after 9/11, they ultimately determined that they were not going to finish the resort. But they'd already done so much work on it. How much work, you say? Enough work that if you had the right view in your Pop Century Resort room, this is what you would see. They completed the entire front lobby area, including the decade markers of 10, 20, 30, and 40. They completed a full building of rooms, and these buildings would just stand there for over 10 years. Look how lovely it stands there, with all the different decades called out. Now, again, thanks to some urban explorers, we have a little bit more view, but this is what the room buildings look like. But you can see they just look like Pop Century buildings. And look, a spoiler, because while the legendary years were created and were built and laid abandoned for over a decade, eventually Disney would announce the Art of Animation Resort that would open right next to Pop Century, and that would utilize the buildings that they made for the legendary resort. The opening area where you saw the 10, the 20, the 30, the 40, this whole lobby section, that now is the lobby of the Art of Animation Resort. And these lovely buildings right here are the Little Mermaid section. Club Mickey. Club Mickey was Mickey's answer to Chuck E. Cheese. That sounds crazy, but it's true. In the 90s, of course, Chuck E. Cheese was getting quite popular. These themed restaurant experiences with animatronics, with interactive games and whatnot were pretty popular. It was quite a big fad. And Eisner believed in the potential spread of Disney. You could build more of these than you could theme parks. And so they developed the concept of Club Mickey, which was going to be their answer to this themed restaurant experience. And they rolled it out, and it all ultimately was a big flop. Similarly, I'm going to skip over to the bottom left here. Mickey's Kitchen feels very similar. Mickey's Kitchen was a restaurant that was attached to, I believe, 2 Disney stores. So, of course, Disney stores went on the expanse around the same time as well, and they actually created 2 restaurants in 2 different locations. One was in California, and I think the other one was in Chicago. Again, you could eat like Disney-themed items, and it was, again, meant to bring more brand affinity to malls and make it easier to experience kind of a Disney experience without having to go to a theme park. Ultimately, these flopped as well, but they feel similar to the Club Mickey. Epcot phone number. This is not the number to like call and book an Epcot visit or any of that nature. There was actually a phone number for a long time that was known to call the payphones that were in the United Kingdom red phone booths, and that if you knew the number, you could call it, and the payphone in the red phone booths in the United Kingdom Pavilion would ring. They no longer work. I saw somebody in a video try it. They tried to call the number. Apparently it has been disconnected. You no longer can call those payphones. Walt is alive references the belief, I guess, that Walt Disney is alive, much like Elvis, I suppose, and he's off living some kind of second life, not attached to the thing that he made, doing his own thing, I guess, and that he's definitely not buried with his wife. I know that can't be true because I've seen his cryogenically frozen head in the Utiladors of the Magic Kingdom next to the Emu pin. And finally, we have the YIPPIE Riot. Here is an article from the LA Magazine about, titled, How a Band of Yippies Shut Down Disneyland for Just the Second Time in History. This took place in 1970, and if you're not familiar, this is the Youth International Party founded by Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman. And they would do these kind of like prank style protests. Obviously, this was at a very, it's a time in American history where there was a lot of conflict. This is shortly after the Kent shooting. There's all kinds, everything is always on pins and needles, right? And so a group of people entered Disneyland. There had been a big writing about how 100,000 people are going to show up. Not that many people showed up, but a group of folks with this Youth International Party showed up to Disneyland, and yeah, they took over. They claimed to be protesting. They had demands including free admission, the liberation of Minnie Mouse, a wage hike for Frontierland's Native American dancers, and the conversion of Aunt Jemima's Kitchen into a Black Panthers themed breakfast joint. This ultimately led to a ton of police from like 9 counties coming in riot gear, basically shutting it down. We have made it to the bottom. Only a few things made it into the darkest waters. We're going to start with Flash Mountain. I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you, chat, that when somebody knows that a photo is being taken on a ride, they are often compelled to do things inappropriate. Perhaps they would be so emboldened as to reveal their body parts to that photo, and perhaps they would do it on a place that is so well known for its photo, like a now defunct Magic Kingdom attraction, Splash Mountain. Obviously, these pictures are not then seen. They are censored and no longer shown when you get to the end of the attraction. However, some of these uncensored photos have made their way onto the internet. And at one time, there was a website called Flash Mountain that held those photos. I'm going to tell you to not go look at it, but I can't control you. Let's talk about Wishes. There was a belief, if you're familiar with the now defunct fireworks show, Wishes, you may know that at the beginning of Wishes, there is a child that sings Starlight, Starbright, first star I see tonight. I wish I may, I wish I might. And there was a rumor that that voice was actually the voice of a girl who had been a Make-A-Wish child. Their wish was to be a part of a Disney show or a nighttime spectacular. And that because of their wish, they were recorded and that their voice was put into Wishes. And when Wishes was ultimately closed, when Wishes was ultimately put away, this was actually an argument that a lot of people used. That they said, Wishes can't go away. You're going to take away that little girl's wish. If you get rid of Wishes, you are spitting in the face of that little girl whose wish was to be a part of a nighttime spectacular at Disney. It's not true. That's not real. You can look up the credits of the Wishes song right now. There was a little girl who was a singer who was paid to record that line. What a horrible thing to spread. Disney's America. You know, I love Disney's America. Disney's America was an idea for another gate. It was going to go outside of Washington, D.C. It was going to be a theme park that was going to be themed around the history of America. It was being pitched as not just a theme park, but also educational, and that it would celebrate the history of America, both through fun, themed attractions, and also through very real and kind of hard-nosed reality of what America's history looked like. And I understand the viewpoint. There was some nervousness from critics of the idea that Disney was just going to paint this like fairy tale picture of what America was. You know, that it wasn't actually going to be good at educational information and that it was only going to show us in the best light. And Disney wanted to make it clear that that was not true. In fact, they wanted to make it so clear that that was not true.
Disney announced their plans for the park on November 11th, 1993, with a presentation by Wise describing the park in detail.
Bob Weiss, lead Imagineer on Disney's America, worked on many a Disney project.
They might have overcorrected a bit by explaining that they would have painful, disturbing, and agonizing slavery exhibits and attractions that captured the horrors of war.
We want to make you a Civil War soldier. We want to make you feel what it was like to be a slave, or what it was like to escape through the Underground Railroad.
You want me to what? You want me to feel what it was like to be a slave? I understand that they are wanting to say like, hey, this will be a good educational park that will not just show the like Pollyanna view of I get it. But boy, is this not the way to communicate that. This ultimately, of course, wouldn't happen again. Why? Because of the failure of Euro Disney. That's right, chat. Just like every other Eisner project, part of the reason why this doesn't work is because of the failure of Euro Disney, but also because they got a huge fight from the folks of Virginia. Let's talk about Handy Manny, May of 2007. Allegedly, in Lincroft, New Jersey in 2007, an episode of Handy Manny was cut off by Comcast and replaced by Korn. Allegedly, Comcast pushed adult entertainment onto the Disney Channel during the Handy Manny time slot in the Lincroft, New Jersey area in 2007, in May of 2007. I don't know if this is true. Obviously, I am not from Lincroft, New Jersey. There are many rumors about this. I cannot confirm nor deny if it actually happened. Handy Manny was able to find his tools, if you know what I mean. Monorail Girl. Monorail Girl was apparently from the mid-2000s, where an adult female, alone on a monorail, or perhaps with one other person, took explicit photos and videos on the monorail and then uploaded them to a website, which apparently became quite shared around and started a bit of a trend. Apparently it was the instance that started the trend, and she was affectionately known as Monorail Girl, as she used her opportunity in an empty monorail car to strip down to nothing. Yeah, Eisner blackmail. There's a lot of talk about the creation of MGM Studios. Many people would tell you that MGM Studios in Orlando, Florida is a direct response to Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. And that if Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida was not ever built, MGM Studios and therefore Disney Hollywood Studios would not exist. However, on the other coast, this is a Los Angeles Times article where MCA officially accused Disney of blackmailing them because Disney had a proposal to build a $150 to $300 million entertainment complex and tourist attraction in Burbank, just a few miles from the Universal Studios tour attraction in Burbank. They alleged that Disney had privately offered to withdraw from the Burbank plan if MCA would give up its proposed Florida studio tour. MCA reported it, and of course, Disney denied. As far as I know, we've never had a conversation with them in that area at all, said Eisner. We're going forward with Burbank in the next year. I have no idea what they're talking about. Anything MCA does or does not do, or anything anybody else does or does not do, will not affect our plans. Now, you might know that there is no Disney shopping center or themed attraction in Burbank. Doesn't exist. So ultimately, it didn't actually happen, but it was at least threatened, perhaps in an attempt to get Universal Studios Florida to not exist. And finally, we come to the final entry on the iceberg, which brings us to Port Disney. I return to our conversation about Westcott from earlier. In the 2000s, Disney was looking for its second gate in California. They knew that they wanted to expand the Disneyland Resort. They wanted to bring a second gate to California, and they started exploring their options. Around the same time, Disney had acquired the Queen Mary. Now, if you're not familiar with the Queen Mary, it is a cruise ship that is in the water about less than a mile from my current location. It's in Long Beach. It hosts many events. They do like a haunt during Halloween. They do a big Christmas event. Disney, through purchasing of another company, had acquired the Queen Mary. They didn't go out of their way to acquire the Queen Mary, but they ended up with the Queen Mary, which turned their attention to Long Beach. When they started creating the idea for the second gate, that came with plans for what was called Port Disney. Look how beautiful it is. The idea of this was that it was going to be a theme park in the Long Beach port, that it was going to be totally aquatic themed. It was going to include things like marine biology. It was going to be definitely very like edutainment, that there was going to be like a shark diving section. A lot of the themes that happened at Port Disney ultimately would go on to be brought to life at Disney Sea in Tokyo. Now, some people would tell you that it didn't happen because Long Beach pushed back pretty heavily. They said that we were going to destroy a lot of the natural water ecosystem there. And how weird it was that we were building a theme park that was designed around the preservation of sea creatures, and that it was going to promote education of marine ecosystems, and that we were going to destroy a ton of natural ecosystems to do that. Not to mention, there was a big concern about the traffic problem that this would create, that this sprawl was going to dramatically affect Long Beach, and that the people of Long Beach were not on board for that literally at all. For all those reasons, Port Disney ultimately didn't happen. However, at the same time, during the planning of Port Disney, we have the planning of Westcott. They're happening at the same moment. Disney is pitching a theme park to both Long Beach and Anaheim, but they wanted Anaheim to foot a lot of the bill. Similarly to Long Beach, some Anaheim residents were quite worried about the impact this would have on their local commute, on their traffic. Disney wanted Anaheim to pay a lot of money for their expansion, for them to acquire land, for them to build Westcott. They said, look at all the business we bring to your city. Look how much part of the economy we are. And they were having a hard time pushing Anaheim in that direction. Similarly, they were getting pushed back from Long Beach. They had designed all of this theme park. They said, we want to put it here. Long Beach was pushing it back. So there is a belief, chat, as is referenced in Port Disney Was Never Real, that this theme park was never actually intended to be built at all. That the only reason Disney concepted this theme park to go into Long Beach was to apply pressure to Anaheim. And that because they didn't want all of that business and those jobs and that economy to go to Long Beach, that they would approve the spend to pay for the expansion and the infrastructure and the work that Disney wanted to do, and that they would foot the bill for it. That, chat, brings us to the end of the Disney Parks Iceberg. We've gone all the way from the top to the bottom, exploring everything from Main Street windows, things people know all about, to Eisner blackmailing MCA and maybe manipulating the city of Anaheim to build a second gate. I hope you all enjoyed this journey through these stories. Again, a lot of them I knew about, but some required me to do a little bit of research. I highly encourage you to check out those videos I suggested. If you want to know more about ghosts that are in theme parks, there's a lot of videos. Check out Jenny's video about Buzzy being stolen. Check out the Alien Encounter documentary. I had a lot of fun researching the pieces of this I wasn't familiar with. I hope you enjoyed hanging out and learning a bit more about it.